we believe we have a mandate to bring godly change to our nation and the world through the 7 spheres or mountains of influence. Welcome to the Truth and Liberty broadcast, brought to you by 7M Ventures and Andrew Wommack Ministries.
Well, welcome to our Monday night's Truth and Liberty live cast. I'm Andrew Wommack, and I've got Richard Harris with us down there on the end, and then Karen Conrad, and our guest tonight is Mark Rowe. He is our resident Brit here. He and his wife have been with us, I think, for 5 years. Wow. And we're going to be talking to him, and we've got some great things to cover. Let me first of all just say that Mark didn't get the memo about wearing something red. We talked about going and changing clothes, but it just, anyway, it just happened.
But you had a reason for it. Because...
Well, it's because he's a Brit, and Brits are just kind of dull. I don't know. I love the Brits. I've been going over there since '89, at least twice a year, sometimes 3 times a year. Yeah. So I love the Brits, but I'm glad that there's a pond between us.
Not a swamp.
But anyway, Mark is a blessing, and we're going to be discussing some things about what's happening in England, because as I said in the tease leading up to this, sometimes, people from all over the world watch our broadcast. Matter of fact, I think we usually have around, 20 nations?
We have many nations on.
And so anyway, we'll bring in some things from Mark's perspective and get his take on some of the things that are happening. And I think it's really, really going to be good tonight. We've got a lot of things to cover. So, Karen, we'll let you give all of the details, because we would like you to get involved in this. You can ask questions. You can get materials. We got a giveaway. You can give and support this. Just a lot of things. So this is Karen Conrad.
Hi, thank you, Andrew. Welcome, everybody, to Truth and Liberty. This is going to be a great broadcast. So just to give you a little bit of information, as Andrew mentioned, you are able to ask questions. We want you to interact with us. So the way that you can do that is if you're watching on truthandliberty.net or awmi.net, you can just answer that question right in the chat section. And we've got a whole team standing by that sends those questions forward here, and we will answer as many as possible. Also, if you're watching on social media, I want to encourage you, we have had some censorship on this program, and so you could go ahead and watch it on social media, but if anything gets interrupted, please join us on truthandliberty.net or awmi.net, and you can ask your question right there in the comment section. And so we're so glad to have the interaction, and we've had just some great questions coming through. And I want to let you know about a few things here going on at the ministry. First of all, we do have a brand new Truth and Liberty website. And as Andrew mentioned, we do a giveaway every week. And tonight we are giving away Andrew's Effortless Change. This is an amazing book. And Andrew will sign that for you. And to be eligible for that, you just want to subscribe at truthandliberty.net. And you'll not only get updates, but you'll be eligible for the free gift every week. Now, last week, we had 12 Principles to Make Your Life Extraordinary by E.W. Jackson. That was so fun to have E.W. on. Yep. And this is his book, and we want to congratulate Jean Hermansky. You are the winner, so we appreciate you watching, and we'll be sending that your way. And E.W. did sign that for you as well. Some things coming up is we have got the GTS in Phoenix. That's on January 3rd at the Arizona.
GTS stands for?
Gospel Truth Seminar.
Not everybody knows these acronyms.
That's
My
true.
Staff is big on condensing everything to acronyms.
That is true. It's kind of like in banking, we did that too. So, Gospel Truth Seminar in Phoenix, and it's at the Arizona Grand Resort and Spa, and we have the guest Greg Fritz. And if you have not heard Greg Fritz, he is amazing.
He's
and
a great man.
You will really, really enjoy that ministry. Also, we've got the registration up for the Men's Advance, and that's March 14th through the 16th. And we have got Tony Dungy and James Brown. And of course, Andrew will be speaking, and I'll tell you, it will get packed out. We've got room for 3,000 this year, don't we?
No, last year, I think we had 1,700, and we totally maxed out our facility. So we've grown.
Yeah, we have. It's going to be awesome. And then just a preview, we've got David, King of Jerusalem. That's coming up April 12th through the 13th. And registration will be up for that soon, and you won't want to miss it. Just to remind you, too, that this is a viewer-supported broadcast. If this has been a blessing to you or God's put on your heart to give towards this, you can do so at truthandliberty.net. Click on donate, or you can call 719-635-1111, and we also have prayer ministers standing by. So if you have questions or need prayer, we are there for you, and we'd love to hear from you.
And also, let me mention that Richard Harris over here is our resident lawyer. He's still a practicing lawyer, but he is the coordinator of our practical government school. And Richard has a list here of some of the things he's put on our website. And Richard, could you just go through this really quickly? You haven't got time to explain everyone, but our website is a great resource. Tell them what's available.
Well, under the resources tab on truthandliberty.net, we try to list things that'll be actually practically useful for you. So we've got a variety of things there, from how to find your congressman to one of the most interesting is a link for you to see what accomplishments Donald Trump's presidency has accomplished so far.
I think there was, 13 pages?
And that was a year ago.
That was a year ago.
It's immense now. And but there's information on the 7 mountains of influence, how to help your church become more involved. One of the more recent things we put on is the Family Research Council's report on hostility to religion. I really encourage everybody to take a look at that. It will be very eye-opening to you. So a lot of resources there for you to check out.
And also Richard writes a blog that we have on there. And so anyway, it's just really awesome information. And if you haven't visited the website, it is truthandliberty.net. Yes. And it would be really, really good for you. All right, so we've got Mark Rowe here. And Mark, I know that people will want to know who you are. We could spend the whole program talking about what God's done in your life. He's pastored churches. You've been a businessman. He's a musician, has written some songs, has had a miraculous healing where he lost his, was it just your equilibrium or your hearing?
Well, balance completely.
And literally was out of commission for
12 years.
12 years. And learned how to believe God, and now he's kind of back to normal.
Whatever that is.
As normal as he can be? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, right.
My kids one time told me, they said they knew I was on the level because my bubble was in the middle. So anyway.
That's deep.
So anyway, he has done a lot of things, but let's start with when you came. We met a long time ago. But then you came probably 5 years ago, and you were visiting with Paul Milligan, our CEO, and of course I'd known Mark and Leslie before, but why don't we start with you talking about how you got involved in demo, and was it your brother or brother-in-law that had his life touched through not demo, but Discipleship Evangelism?
Yes, that's true. It was my brother, but really it came about, I had a church in Alford in England, a very rural area. And I'd connected with Paul Milligan and Greg Moore. I came over to Texas around about 2000, I think, 1999, to lead worship at one of their pastors' conferences. We had a mutual friend that had connected us. And so through Paul and Greg, I got to know about you. And then you were actually the guest speaker at one of their conferences, I think 2006, 2007. And that's what really started me listening to your material in the UK. And Paul Milligan had invited me to one of your ministers' conferences. I came to a couple. And but I was really challenged because I had this little church in rural England, and I had this, to use a big word, eclectic mix of people, a real diverse array. I had people who'd been to Oxford and Cambridge and captained industries, and I'd had people who'd just come out of prison for drug dealing and grievous bodily harm. And I needed something to put all these guys on the same page, give them the same kind of level of understanding. And on one of the ministers' conferences, I came across your Discipleship Evangelism program. 48 lessons, amazing. It just covers all the basics and introduces people to your particular teaching. So I took that back. 48 lessons. I said to the church, look, guys, humor me. I want to go through one lesson a week, and we'll do it twice so everybody can get there. And that's 48 weeks. You'll get 4 weeks off for good behavior. and so basically we went through this program, and I'm telling you, it was transformational. It was life-changing. And the church, the unity as well that developed in doing this every week, this interactive studies of each lesson. And honestly, and then of course, my brother became severely alcoholic, and his family rejected him, and I got him into a Christian rehab in the UK. But when he came out, he was struggling. So I started sending him one lesson a week. I just photocopy the DE, because you make that freely available as well. And I basically sent it to my brother, and it just transformed his life.
And you shared this with me, and that was during the time that we had started the Discipleship Evangelism program in Uganda. And when Leland Shores was alive and he went over there, it was miraculous, the results that he got.
Right.
But in the second and third generation, I wasn't hearing the same results. And since you had had such good success with the Discipleship Evangelism program, I asked you to go over to Uganda.
Right.
And check it out. And there were things that weren't right, and I just felt like you were the right guy, so we brought you on to do that, and that has now developed into what you're doing now. Describe what's happening now.
Well, I mean, you sent me on a kind of reconnaissance mission to see how well we were discipling people, because there was just a small team of Ugandan pastors going out into the bush. But we were able to bring on a young man called Ricky Burge, awesome young man, a graduate from here in Colorado. He's been out in Uganda 4 years now. And he was able to go and be very strategic in how we use the discipleship program, which is really targeting leaders and pastors. It's a top-down approach, because if we can disciple the leaders, they can disciple the people. So that's what we've done, and Ricky has been so successful. He's even gone into neighboring countries, and this year, in 8 months, has discipled all the leaders and pastors of the Pentecostal church in both Rwanda and South Sudan, which is a war zone, in 8 months, and just by that systematic approach.
And Ricky came from a background where he was a drug dealer, and he was shot and left for dead, and if I remember correctly, wasn't he stripped?
Well, he was beaten, yeah.
Yeah, and they had taken, he wasn't shot.
No, he wasn't shot.
Okay, but
his
anyway,
father was shot.
They took his gun,
Yeah.
they took his clothes,
That's
they
right.
took everything he had, and he woke up, and he should have been dead,
Yeah.
but he survived, and he came to the Lord, and then came immediately into our school. And so anyway, this guy, he's in the bush in Africa, and he's dealing with people, and he's been through these war-torn countries, and to him, that's no big deal. That's the same thing as it, wasn't it Detroit that he came from?
Gary, Indiana.
Gary, Indiana. And so it's no big deal to him. And Ricky slept on the floor for the first year or two.
Oh, at least.
And I mean, it is amazing. He is the perfect guy.
He's amazing.
And I was over there with him, and Mark has been in charge of drilling water wells. I think we've drilled, 11? And I went and saw some of those places, and Ricky got one of it'd be the equivalent of a mayor of a village, the elder of a village, and Ricky just read him the riot act because they had not been taking care of it. And I mean, this guy is fearless. He takes no guff off these people.
Takes no prisoners.
And because he is a black man, I think that he has an immediate rapport with them that maybe we wouldn't have,
absolutely.
and they really respect him. And I tell you, it is miraculous what's happening. And we've got a bright future. We just hooked up with Trevor, what's his last name?
Tychon.
And I was just there this last summer and saw him, and man, he has come up with some things. Matter of fact, we've got a lady that is a graduate of our school, Julie Mapatano, who's from the Congo, and she held a conference last year with Delron Shirley, one of our teachers here in the school. He runs our third-year mission school, and he had, wasn't it, close to 1,000?
Yeah, I mean, it's the same group that we were supposed to go and see with Steve Bartlett.
And they wouldn't let you in. They found out you were a Brit and didn't.
I wasn't wearing red, so they wouldn't let me in. But no.
Anyway, she held a conference with Delron Shirley, and she's got an orphanage over there where I think they're taking care of hundreds, 200-300 children a day. She's got a school, and I support her. And anyway, she is now wanting to get in water purification. She's wanting to start feeding them. She's wanting to start not just touching them spiritually, but providing some of the things. And so we're going to put her in touch, well, through Mark with Trevor. And so we're branching out beyond Uganda, beyond Rwanda, into the Congo. And
Yep.
man, we got a bright future.
Tanzania as well.
Do you know what I like that's different about maybe a lot of missionary programs is you really empower the people to be able to learn how to live in their country without
Right.
being dependent
Right.
upon giving.
Yeah, and that's a whole other subject
It's really
which we may
unique.
get into. But I mean, creating a dependency is the worst thing we've ever done.
Right. Well, you were telling me the other day, Mark, that part of the challenge in Uganda and these places is that there's these United Nations NGOs or whatever that are just freely giving things away.
Sure.
And so we go in and we're trying to teach self-sufficiency. And what's the challenge there? And what
Well,
are our
the
results
challenge is, and it's not just Uganda, it's really anywhere in the developing world. I experienced the same in Eastern Europe, in Romania years ago. It's about making God our source, not us.
That's so good.
That's the bottom line. And so often people see us in developing countries as their source and not the Lord. So, I mean, Andrew was the one that said to me, you know, when you go to Uganda and do this reconnaissance, you know, I believe it's important that we disciple people first because then they're transformed by the renewing of their mind, which puts them in a much better place to be able to receive stuff, if you like. You know.
We have had some good success, but the last time I was there, this last summer, I was talking with Bishop George.
I was with you.
And he's a great guy. We just hit it off. He was taken in by the missionaries when
Well,
he had
he
leprosy
was a
as a child.
Karamojong.
And anyway, we've hit it off with him, but we got to discussing this, that we've now drilled some water wells. We've had discipleship evangelism programs, but there is a mindset where these people would rather you just give them something than them take responsibility.
And that goes back to what Richard was just saying, because we're fighting against, you know, there's lots of NGOs and aid organizations there.
NGOs is
Non-government organizations.
There's
And-
another
Yes, I'm sorry.
abbreviation.
But the problem is that
We didn't invent that one.
That's it.
they get government funding and stuff like that, and they go and they just give it out. And they're not so much concerned about the spiritual development and character development. So you're fighting against that.
Yeah, and it's something that's been bred into them for generations,
Right.
and this is what they expect from white foreigners is to come and just throw money at them.
Sure.
But they don't want to work.
But you know, there's a parallel between that and kind of what we're fighting for here to preserve
true.
free enterprise and capitalism.
Absolutely.
And you've lived through it in
Oh, yeah.
socialism in England
Yeah.
and the effects of that kind of
Yeah.
a system and what it does on the mindset
Absolutely.
of the people there.
Yeah.
So, Mark, let me ask you some questions here. You have come to the States you're going into your 5th year, and you've fallen in love with the States.
Oh, I
He's
do.
got
I
a
love it.
bunch of guns. and anyway, you've now got a green card, and I don't know what your plans are in the future, whether you'll go back or not, but I know that you love what you're seeing here.
I
Could
do.
you give us a contrast maybe coming from England? And you've also done business in Hong Kong. You've been all over the world
Mm-hmm.
and stuff. So give us a perspective that maybe some of our viewers, you know, sometimes we don't recognize
Right.
what we have because we've been in it our whole lives.
Well, you know, when I was in the UK as a pastor, I mean, I realize in hindsight, because hindsight's a wonderful thing, of course, but I had genuinely a poverty mindset. And I was challenged to my boots when people like Paul Milligan, our CEO, came into my life. Because Paul and I used to have some very interesting conversations. For those that don't know, Paul is a very successful businessman from Texas. He started multiple businesses and corporations. But we became firm friends, and he would come over to the UK and minister in our church. And I mean, give you an example. My wife and I started this church. We had no income for 6 years. You know, we just...
And that's not abnormal.
No, it isn't.
In England, I'd say the majority of ministers, this is the mindset.
Yeah, and we
they
thought
have.
that's how it should be, that we're doing the will of the Lord, you know, by being poor. And then people like Paul come into your life, and then later Billy Epperhart and the like, and they challenge you. And so when we visited the States, I mean, not only were these guys businessmen, but their level of faith was something I hadn't encountered before. And it's true to say that I realized, looking back, that I was a product of the society in which I'd been raised, which is very much a welfare state. So basically, if there was a problem, so when we started the church in a rural area, unemployment was a huge problem in the rural area. So Paul comes over and I'm going, Paul, you've no idea. You know, we're just poor, we can do nothing, we are nothing. And he goes, huh? He says, have you finished? He says, quit moaning. He said, there's no jobs, you do something about it. And I'm like, what? How rude.
Put responsibility on you instead of the government.
He said, God has given you a mandate and the resources, you know, everything in you, you've got the Spirit of God in you to be able to make a difference. You do something about it. Why are you abdicating your responsibility to the government? And that's what the church, I believe, generally in the UK certainly, but in Europe has done. We have abdicated our responsibility to government. We look to the government for everything. Once I got that revelation, that completely changed my approach to church. I looked at the needs in the community and we started doing things. And it was amazing.
Such as?
Well, for example, we in the rural areas of England, the banks, there were only 4 or 5 main banks in the UK. They were pulling out of rural areas. So there were no banking facilities for retired people, many of whom had, you know, retired to the countryside. And all of a sudden, the banks were pulling out. So I'm thinking, okay, what do? We'll start our own bank. And,
a pastor starting a bank. Now,
well,
that is taking initiative.
Or credit union.
Yeah, that's great.
And we did. And we basically provided services in our little church where people would come in and, of course, all of a sudden we're building a bridge with the community. We're meeting their needs. We're winning their trust. And then all of a sudden we had a cafeteria, a restaurant as well. And then we did IT training. We worked with we did all kinds of things. We just looked at what are the needs of this community and how can we meet them with the resources we have. And we just trusted God. Now, you know, grant funding, because it's a welfare state, is huge in the UK. But religious organisations, churches, were barred from being able to apply for any. But once we started to prove that we could deliver, we had the infrastructure to reach the people that the local government were wanting to reach. All of a sudden, that went out of the window. And we went from not being able to apply for funding to one particular year getting 80% of the funding for the whole area.
Oh my
Wow.
goodness.
So, you know, it can be done.
Now, you would think that other preachers would have loved this and have taken encouragement and have done the same thing. How was it received?
Well, you know, I mean, this is towards the end when I actually left because we felt God was telling us to give it away. But I mean, at the end of that, I believe other churches started to pick up, you know, this idea of having credit unions and things to serve the community because the government weren't providing it. It's the same with the youth work. They cut we had government-funded youth workers in every town, and all of a sudden the funding went. So we had youth work 5 nights a week. We went out there and we worked with the kids. And I told the government, I said, look, we're going to do this whether you're here or not, whether there's funding or not, because that's what God's told us to do. So once they saw we were in earnest, they started to help us.
And you know, Mark, he and Leslie just felt led to leave this church, and it was like he was giving examples. Things were working. He was making an impact and stuff,
yeah.
but he just felt led to walk away from it with nowhere to go. And how long were you without a job?
Well, it was about 9 months until we kind of met you.
But isn't that something that he just walked away from it, and then God sent him here, and man, he has been a blessing. And Leslie, his wife, has taken our translations from being scattered, and we didn't know what we had translated into what language. And do you know any of the details, how many books we now have?
Well, I don't know about books, but I think we're in 50-something languages. But we tend to focus on the DE, the Discipleship Evangelism program. I think she's brought on 31 languages in the last 2 years.
That's awesome.
Including Arabic and...
So anyway, God had him leave a secure, successful place with nowhere to go and wound up with us. And you've been a blessing to us, Mark.
Thank you.
And he's traveled with me a lot, and he's just a great resource person. He can remember anybody's name. He makes them feel important, and he remembers details that I don't. I use him as my personal assistant when we're traveling.
Do you know those downloads are free and they're available?
Absolutely.
Do you want to share with people how they can find those?
I mean, we have a section on the main website, which is awmi.net. And if you go awmi.net/demo, DEMO, which is about demonstrating the love of Christ, you can download 30-something translations in PDF format of the discipleship program in all those languages for free, in keeping with your ethos.
That's awesome. So let me also ask you about Brexit and about what's going on in England, because we don't usually get a perspective that you would have on that. So I think that there's comparisons to be made between the U.S. and England, because here we've elected, Trump to drain the swamp and stuff like this, and yet the people that are in power are just fighting the will of the people on every level.
Right.
So what's happening in England?
Well, I mean, in England, you've got the Conservative Party led by Theresa May. I mean, she was a surprise. She kind of came out of nowhere. And, I think she's got a tough job on her hands. But basically, she's leading the country out of the European Union because that was the will of the people. They voted to leave.
There was over 17 million, wasn't it, or something that voted to...
I can't remember the exact numbers, but I know I was one of them.
I think it's 17.4 million.
I was one of them. But the problem is that my understanding is, because I've been out of the country for actually 6 years now, the problem is that the parliamentarians who represent the people, most of those didn't want to leave Europe, because after 40 years we were kind of inextricably linked with Europe, and I mean they are our biggest trading partner for sure. So over 40 years we've gone from, as I said at the outset, being a common market, which was meant to be a trading kind of situation, to a situation where there some bureaucrats, nameless, faceless, unelected, are trying to create a federal Europe to rival America. And sovereign laws, the sovereign laws of the UK were being usurped by European laws. And crazy, the agricultural policy and all that kind of stuff.
Immigration.
Yeah, but we have butter mountains and grain mountains and wine lakes because they were kind of, kind of fixing, manipulating things. And immigration was a huge problem because when the Berlin Wall fell, Eastern Europe, I mean, we had, they reckon, over 1 million people there illegally from Eastern Europe. I mean, many of them have actually gone back now to Poland, Romania, and these countries because it's not everything that they thought it was going to be. I mean, taxation is very, very high in the UK. People's disposable income, the amount they've got left after tax, in some cases, is virtually zero.
Here's another thing that you could comment on. But they talk about, but we have free health care.
Right. And
how free is their health care?
It is, but it's crippling, I believe, the country because of the cost, hence the high taxation. National insurance, that's what we pay for, maintenance of the police and that kind of thing, but also the health system is huge. That's what I'm saying.
You knew Bob Ward, didn't you?
Yeah, I knew Bob well. I was on the board with him.
He just died last year, but anyway, Bob shared with me one time that he went and inquired, and 30% of his income went to the free health care.
Right. Right.
So when they say it's free, it's not free. You are paying through the nose, and then on top of that, the health care isn't that good, and many times you have to get on these waiting lists. I had a woman who worked for me who had a gallbladder surgery that she needed done, and she waited 2 years and finally had to go and pay for it herself out of the pocket. That's the only way you could get it treated, or otherwise you'd had to wait another 2 years.
Well, I mean, I was the same. Early on, through playing rugby, I'd got my nose bent. And I had to...
You got your nose all bent out of shape.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was fair. It was fair. And, but I had to have a sinus operation. And I mean, because I work for a financial services company, I got it done in a week. If I'd gone on the National Health Service, I would have waited months and months.
So does that mean that your employer paid for it outside of the National Health?
Absolutely. So you've got two systems going on.
And if you want good treatment and quick treatment, you got to pay for it.
Well, absolutely.
So the free stuff is welfare, and you just can't sustain that.
No, you can't, and it is crippling the UK. It's one of the biggest drains on the economy is the healthcare.
And yet people in America will cite this as we want to be like Europe. We want to be like all, it reminds me of the Israelites saying, we want to be like all the other nations and have our own king.
Right.
And God says, you really want a king? Here's what it'll cost you.
Yeah, absolutely. So Mrs. May has a particular problem because, I mean, it didn't help actually. Donald Trump, I was sharing with you before, she's got this deal now, this Brexit deal. And last week, there was supposed to be a vote in Parliament last week, and she cancelled it because she realised it would fail. It's now scheduled for January the 14th. But basically, even her own party won't support her on it.
But she got 27 European nations to agree to this thing. And you know that if 27 liberal, socialist nations agreed to it, it's not good for Britain.
And that's why President Trump tweeted, just to help her, this is a bad deal for the UK. And I'm like, oh my goodness, she's got no chance. But what she was doing today, I actually listened in on the House of Commons in Parliament, and she was basically standing up. I mean, it was very lively exchanges, and some of her biggest critics were actually female MPs from the opposition party. But I mean, she was kind of saying to the MPs, if we crash out of here without a deal, which would be a nightmare, it would be chaotic. She said, you know, the British people, because they voted for this, are going to hold you responsible.
Yeah, she was basically saying, nearly a quote, that we may not have the perfect deal, but don't let a lack of a perfect deal stop a good deal, which is better than no deal.
Right.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, so she's in a very unenviable position, and the opposition party, the Labour Party, which is the equivalent of the Democrats, are basically talking about a no confidence vote in the government now.
Now you're saying that she's the conservative leader, but you know we had Andrea Williams, I think is her name. She was here on Truth and Liberty.
That was excellent.
She's excellent.
Christian Concern.
She's a barrister in England, and she came and spoke at my ministers' conference. And she, in private, was telling me the comparison between the U.S. and England is that, like here in the U.S., we have conservatives, like Donald Trump, and you could name many people that are true conservatives. But in England, the people who are conservatives, like David Cameron, he would be considered a flaming liberal by American standards. So what the British call a conservative is still very liberal compared to our standards.
Well, that's right. And after Margaret Thatcher, we got Tony Blair, and he was very friendly with the Clintons. I mean, you couldn't really tell when David Cameron came on board the difference between Labour, New Labour they called themselves, and then the Conservative Party, and really there was very little to choose between them. The old Labour model of, you know, being run by trade unions and things like that, Mrs. Thatcher put paid to all of that. She really did. Give the unions a hard time and change things.
So, Mark, is there any voice for a Christian worldview in the UK government anymore?
Well, you heard Andrea. I listened to that broadcast, and by the way, I just love these broadcasts. And she sounded quite down.
She was basically saying that here we have some people who are fighting the fight that we can look to and pray for. She says she cannot think of one national figure in the UK that is a true conservative.
And she's looking to America for encouragement because, like, if we do something here, it tends to have a ripple effect. And she was. I mean, that's what she was basically saying. You guys, if you guys go down, what hope is there for the Western world?
And you know, people will often criticize us. I'm talking about Truth and Liberty. I just got some criticism this week about you need to just go back to preaching the gospel and quit all of this stuff. But what we're doing is not just for the United States. I really do believe that we are the world's last best hope of preserving freedom.
I agree.
Andrew, one of the news articles I downloaded this week to the website is in Canada, the LGBTQ whatever activists are suing the Catholics, trying to force them to admit two same-sex married people to teach in a Catholic school. So their ability to live out the gospel in their ministry is being threatened, and that's on our doorstep here.
Well, it's already here because one of the things in this stack of stuff that you gave us is somebody got fired because they wouldn't use the personal pronoun to refer to some
gender.
What do you call it? Transgender? Anyway, some person that's really messed up. And so it's happening here. And if we don't take a stand, I guarantee you, I think that we are the best hope of reversing this ungodliness. And with our military might, people don't, want to talk about that, but I tell you what, if we didn't have the military might that we have, the Muslims would there's many people in this earth that would overcome us in a heartbeat if we didn't have the military might.
And I think if we didn't stand up, who would?
Well, that's the point. I mean,
There's nobody else can.
Just before I left England, it was just recent, that's when they passed the same-sex marriage bill. And I mean, the church tried to, to put up some kind of resistance and get a petition together, but it was woeful. And all that tells me is that the church doesn't have the influence in the UK compared to, say, here in the United States.
And back in 2017, Canada passed a law, and I have the stuff with me, not on my person, but I've got the documentation for this. But they passed a law that if a parent tried to tell their child that you are a boy or that you are a girl, that's child abuse, and the government is free to come in and take your children away. So in other words, if a child just wants to say, today I feel like a girl or I feel like a boy, and the parent is tied his hands, and if you say anything, they can take your children away from you.
That's insane.
It is insane. How in the world are parents going to raise a child? All a child has to do is say, well, today I feel like a girl, and they won't let me be that, and they can get rid of their parents. That's just crazy.
It is.
And I tell you, this is where things are going, and we've got to fight these issues, and that's the reason that we've started Truth and Liberty, is because it's time to speak out on these kind of things. And I just got a criticism this last week of somebody saying, you just need to quit talking about politics and all of this stuff. And one of the things that they brought up is Trump and his sexual escapades and paying off prostitutes, which he denies, but I think that most people acknowledge that he has not been pristine in this area,
right,
and stuff. And but one of the things I would say is, what is the alternative? I certainly do not support any ungodliness on the part of our president, but what's the alternative? If you'd have had Hillary Clinton in, there's not a thing that Trump has done that Hillary hadn't done, and 10 times worse. But if you just look at what they're doing, man, Trump, like you said, there's page after page after page of accomplishments that Trump has made in 2 years that are some of the most godly things that I think that we have had in my lifetime. He is really attacking some of the things.
Really
Just imagine the border situation if Hillary Clinton had been president. Where would we be today? Instead of a president who took a stand and enforced American sovereignty. Karen was at a conference this last weekend that I think some enlightening stuff came out about borders and how important that is. But yeah, we need to fight.
Yeah, share
really
some of that, Karen.
Yeah, so I had the privilege of going to Washington, D.C. and being part of a conversation and strategic discussion with Dr. Jordan Peterson. And so there was about 50 leaders in the conservative movement that were there, and we were able to ask questions and listen. And he had so many good points. But one of the things he talked about was the borders, like how important it is that we pay attention to this border fight. Because he said there's a deeper meaning with borders. Borders mean identity. And so when we remove borders, the physical borders of a country, he talked about how the benefit of peace and unity within our borders is gone, because that's one of the things that you find. You find your individualism, your community, and that is just like a beginning to all these other areas that we are trying, in the secular society, and the liberals are trying to remove borders so that there's anarchy and chaos.
Scripturally, man, the Lord made a huge distinction between the Jews and all of the other nations.
Right.
And He established borders. He refused to allow the Jews to go in and affect Esau's descendants and things like this. And then Jesus talked about that in the end times. He's going to separate the nations one from another, not just individuals. And you'll sometimes hear people say that borders are just arbitrary, that they are man-drawn, but God established borders. He is going to separate nations. There's going to be sheep nations, goat nations, and people who are saying that we're all individuals and it's just, we're all one. It is not true, and that is not a scriptural principle.
Right.
And it's a deception that takes away our identity and makes us embrace things that are contrary to the Christian foundation of this nation.
But that's an interesting, if I may just say, that's a picture of Europe. So Europe has set out to have this amorphous kind of superstate where people can travel between countries. If you have a European passport, like I do, you could travel to any one of those 7 countries technically, and you can have a visa, and you can work without a visa. Well, all of a sudden, we get this influx from North Africa, from Syria, from across the Mediterranean. I mean, and thousands, sadly, have died. But all of a sudden, it's completely changed Europe. It's broken up. This Schengen agreement, they're falling out with each other. They're closing their borders. They're putting troops on their borders. Italy's refusing to take refugees. They're falling out with each other. And all of a sudden, they're back to square one. And this is the immigration problem. Here's the thing with that. In the next 50 years, Africa's population is going to quadruple. It's going to be 4 times as many people. So
they're averaging 9-something children per couple,
Uganda
whereas
is a classic case.
Others are averaging less than 2.
But if they can't cope now, Europe, and it's causing the breakup, it's causing right-wing governments to come into power because of the immigration situation, what are they going to do in the next decades when the number of people increases massively because of the birth rate? But those borders are now going back up again. Right-wing governments are coming in. Troops are being put on the borders. They're all falling out with each other.
It is not one world.
No.
Contrary to the song, it is one world. We're all one people.
Well, Europe is tribal, in my opinion.
It is not.
Well,
true.
liberalism and socialism just doesn't work.
It does, and there's not a single example of it working. And yet, there's a statistic that 52% of millennials believe that socialism and communism is superior to capitalism.
Right.
That is gross ignorance.
They've been indoctrinated.
They have. Well, we've got about 15, 16 minutes left. Let's take some questions here.
All right, great. So we've got the first question coming in from AWM Chat, and the question is, do you think countries such as England, France, Germany, etc., will be able to take their countries back from the refugees and their laws?
Wow. Is that for me?
Yeah.
I think it's, as we would say, touch and go. I think things have gone so far. There's been so much appeasement, particularly of Islamic nations and the Sharia law and things like that. There are areas of the UK now, I believe, where Sharia law is more important to people than the sovereign law of the United Kingdom.
Dewsbury is one of the hubs for training radical terrorists, and they can't touch them because they have a no-go zone where the Sharia law is in effect in Dewsbury, England.
And France is equally, look what's going on in France at the moment with the riots and Paris burning. And
a mutual friend of ours, Marie-Helene Milan, she says that there's certain areas in Nice where you cannot go because of the Muslim population. And as a woman, if she doesn't have on all of the headdress and veil and stuff, they will beat you up, kill you, sexually assault you, and they have the right to do it because you aren't abiding by their law.
Well, unless the church, which I think is the only hope, rises up and I don't know how we can redress that situation because it's gone so far. And then, of course, you've got the whole population issue. We're being outstripped in terms of birth rate by many of the people that have come into the country. So I really don't know. I pray that we can.
Did you know President Eisenhower saw this coming? And I read a statement, and he said that we should not tolerate anybody who's using the Constitution to destroy the Constitution. And he specifically talked about Muslims in the 50s who were coming in and wanting to put Sharia law and things like this into place. And he said we shouldn't tolerate that.
Right.
Man, it's a desperate
the answer to
situation.
the question is I really don't know. I pray to God that we can.
I tell you what, if we wait much longer, I can guarantee you nothing's going to happen. We got to do something now. And in America, we need to stand up now.
We do, and I think a part of this discussion and what Andrew is helping us understand that if we don't stand up now, we will end up in these situations. And it's like we're being warned.
Everything that Mark could tell us about Europe or about England, I can guarantee you everything is happening here in the U.S. on a smaller scale. We are going in the exact same direction. We're just a few years behind.
Right.
Well, let me pose a question, if I may. if you go to some of those countries that the people come from, would you get reciprocation? Would you be able to practice your faith in those countries in the way, and your lifestyle in the way that they do here?
We just have 2 of our graduates that were in a Muslim country. I won't mention where because this is still sensitive stuff, but they were over there, and one of their friends, there was a few Westerners that were there that they met together and stuff, and one of their friends was beaten and raped by the Muslims, and there was nothing done, and they had to withdraw, and they now have come back to the States, and they go in and out training people and doing things, but they can't live there because there is no protection for them. There are no rights if you aren't Muslim in these countries.
Yep.
Well, I think this next question will actually really help to understand what is actually happening. And so this comes from AWM Chat, and they say, can Mark or the host comment on the 2 or 3 cases in England of sick babies whose parents were forced by English courts to unplug machines, not allowed to take them to the USA for new treatments, etc.?
Wow.
Are you aware of that?
I wasn't particularly, but I
am. When I was just there this year, there was a child who the health service deemed as the chances weren't good enough for them to survive, and so they were going to take them off the machines when there were other treatments available, and there were doctors and people that were willing to fund it, but the National Health Service would not allow it because they didn't deem their life important enough. And see, this is what people who want National Health Service, I can guarantee you, any insurance program, free medical treatment that you put into place ultimately is going to be governed by cost. And it costs huge amounts of money to give everybody free health care. And what's going to happen is they will deem that you're too old, your chances of surviving are not good enough, so they won't treat the old. They won't treat people that have cancer or something that, the chances are not good, and they will just allow them to die. And so the government is arbitrarily going to decide who lives and who dies under a national health care system.
That's right.
It also goes to, I'm listening to Mark and I'm thinking, what's the role of the church in all this? What can the church do? And this is worldview right here is what we're talking about. These people in the UK or in America, it doesn't matter, but they're talking about unplugging a child, depriving the parents of their God-given authority over that child. That comes down to what you believe is true about God and about people and human beings and the right to life and everything else. So, churches we cannot afford in this country to sit back any longer and think, I'm not going to be involved in government or politics or these areas of society, or it's not our job. We're just going to talk about 3 steps to, whatever.
But here's another worldview, the fact that anybody who wants to give government control over any area of your life is ultimately going to have that government abuse it.
That's right.
Absolutely.
And so that is the reason that the Founding Fathers of the United States put so many limits, the Bill of Rights and all of these things, because they were fearful of the power of government. And yet our society today is moving away from this and wanting to give government more control because of short, temporary benefit to it, and it's just wrong. It's a biblical worldview.
I was reading some Old Testament today about King Josiah in 2 Kings and Chronicles, 2 Chronicles 33. And it's fascinating because the hallmarks of that society, things had got so bad they'd lost the word. The hallmarks of that society were child sacrifice, homosexuality, and a fascination with the occult. What is different between that and today? And people say, well, we don't have child sacrifice. Oh, really? We don't have
61 million babies sacrificed.
Right. We don't have, problems with homosexuality. And then, in the occult. Every program you can watch on television is like a fascination with the occult. So what is different? And most empires, towards the end, when their demise, their decay, you got this liberality.
Yes.
In every
That's because it's at its core, it's demonic.
Right.
It's not just human. It's not just natural. This is a spirit of Antichrist. It's against everything that is moral. They attack biblical standards, And I know that there's probably people watching who will say, oh, no, it's not spiritual. These are just natural forces. We are fighting a spiritual battle, and the only people who can turn it around are the church,
Right.
the people that have the authority
Right.
and can see through this ruse.
Yeah, that's really
That's
good.
right.
All right, so Truth and Liberty, this came through that website. And the question is, are there any good Christian news sources or influential leaders to follow on events going on in the UK? And how can Americans help pray for the UK?
Wow. Yeah, I'll be honest, I'm not aware of any great sort of news within the church you're talking about. Sorry, the
Yeah,
question.
so just
Christian.
to follow that would be
Right.
in line with Christian values.
It's hard to find in the U.S.
It
You know,
is.
Fox is considered to be conservative, and yet I think that they waffle on a lot of things in an effort to be accepted. And One America, I don't know a lot about that, but what I know about One America is really good, and that now is getting more and more popular.
Somebody just put me onto that because I actually tend to listen to the BBC World Service, the news, round the clock. That's where I find out when I travel abroad what's going on. So I do get information, but somebody just put me onto that One America.
I tell you, when I travel to the UK, and of course on the airlines, I fly British Air and things like this. I see a lot of British stuff, and the British stuff is not conservative at all.
It tends to be
I mean,
biased.
they said that George Bush was an alcoholic. And people in Britain thought that he was just a staggering drunk the whole time. They didn't get the message that it was 30 years before that he had a drinking problem and got over it. They say things about Trump. I mean, it is so skewed.
It is.
over
And
there.
I remember when Ronald Reagan was president and he got on very well, as you know, with Margaret Thatcher. But I mean, they made him out to be some kind of B-rate actor, some kind of buffoon. And yet you come here and people remember him with real affection.
Absolutely.
And I was like shocked because we got this totally different perspective through the media.
My friends in the UK, they ask me often about what's going on, and when I tell them, they just are like, oh, we've never even heard this. We've
Right.
heard just the opposite.
Right.
You know, people to go back to that question, people can get on Christian Concerns website.
I was gonna say
I believe
Christian
they have daily or weekly posts about events going on there.
Yeah.
So that's at least one
Christian
source.
Concerns.
Right.
Okay.
There
very
are
good.
some people raising up, but you know, how do you fight these things that have been entrenched for generations
Right.
and stuff? It's hard, but they're beginning to do it, and the internet has given us access to things that we wouldn't have had before.
That's right.
All right, that's
Yep.
good.
Good and bad.
Okay, here's a question that's coming in from chat, and the question is the United States still the premier country for sending out missionaries for the gospel of Christ, or does that distinction now belong to another country?
Richard?
Well, I've heard that South Korea is actually the leading missionary sending country in the world now, and perhaps also Brazil, of all places.
Now, is that per capita or in gross numbers?
I believe it's gross numbers. Yeah. Now, don't
That's
quote
a
me
sh-
on that. I'd have to.
That's a
document
shame.
that.
I do know some people that have come here. We've got a Bible college student that came here as a missionary from India.
From India. Wow.
Yeah.
Well, I know when I was in Israel a few years ago, there were lots of South Korean Christians around trying to spread the word and so forth. So
When I was in
there was
China
a real revival there.
a few years back,
lot of Chinese.
I actually met some people that I forget the exact number, but I think it was 90,000 Chinese that were going through training, and they expected to be martyred. But they were going to the Muslim countries and going to infiltrate it, 90,000 strong or something like this. And I met one of the guys who was the leader in that movement. So
Yeah. I met guys in Bucharest in Romania years ago who were Chinese missionaries. I think there are a lot of missionaries from China, but I don't think the numbers are
Probably can't
widely.
report that.
Yeah, exactly.
And you know, there is a direct relationship between us not being the spiritual leaders to us decaying the way that we are. Because again, democracy, John Adams said democracy is totally unfit but for anybody but a religious and moral people. And if America ever ceases to be immoral, that it will be destroyed as easily as a whale swimming through a net.
Yeah.
Do you know that was with Jordan Peterson? He really approaches things from a factual perspective, not necessarily a theological at all. Actually, he will quote the Bible, but that's what he said, is that the strength of the West, and for us to keep an edge, The foundation of a Judeo-Christian ethic is absolutely critical.
Well, who was the Frenchman that came over in the 1800s? Is it Tocqueville?
De Tocqueville.
De Tocqueville.
Yeah.
And he said that he looked for the strength of America, and he was looking for all of these things in our government and everything, and he said he found it was the strength of the churches, the morality of the people. It was the strength of America.
That's right.
And it was just reflected in the government system.
Character.
And it's that Protestant work ethic that made the West
And
prosperous.
I know that there's
Yeah.
people that hate
That's
that,
true.
and you're making
from
something out,
worldview.
but that is fact. And if you don't agree with it, you are the one that has drunk the Kool-Aid, because that is fact. And if you go back and study it, that's true.
That's the thing, history supports it.
Absolutely.
Fully.
Yes,
All right, we
it
got time
fully
for one
does.
more question. Kyle.
Okay, great. We have a lot of questions here. So I guess I'll ask this one, and this would probably be for you, Mark. Is there as much voter fraud in the UK like there is in the US? And if so, what are they doing to curb it? Are they doing anything?
As I say, I've been out of the UK for 6 years, but I would say no. One thing about the UK is I think that, you know, they've got systems very tight. It's a much smaller country. You're talking about a country the size of Colorado.
Well, it's half the size of
geographically.
Colorado with 60 million people in it.
65 or
60, yeah, so.
So, but systems and things are in place, so I would say no. There
Okay.
isn't the fraud.
All right, good. Do we
They
have
don't
time?
have to have fraud, because in just a few years, the Muslims will be the dominant deal, and they can just vote in whatever they want. That's a shame.
Possibly.
Yeah, that is. Do we have time for one more?
One more.
Okay, so this is coming in again from chat, and the question is, or it's kind of a comment, it's dangerous to accept funding from government. Should we not be cautioning the church about the risk of being supplanted or co-opted by the secular government?
Yeah, that's a great question. I know I used to do a lot of funding applications when I was in the church because we had very little income. And one of the problems was that these applications were lengthy, but they made you jump through hoops. But even when you got the funding, you know, they would have often control over things. So, you know, it's a fine line to walk.
Let me say that it's not only funding, but we've had so many people try and pressure us to become accredited. But to be accredited, you have to be subjected to the government, and I couldn't even teach in my own school because I don't have the credentials. They would mandate us start teaching homosexuality, diversity,
Exactly.
and I'm not going there. And so that is a great question,
Very
and the
similar.
comment is that no, we should not be beholden to the government in anything. We ought to be free on that.
Right.
Yeah.
So we're out of time. We've only got 30 seconds left, but thank you, Mark. You were a
Great.
blessing.
Amen.
Appreciate you
Very
being
good.
with us, and we appreciate you being with us. And I hope that this really helps you. You know, we're getting a perspective from more than just us.
Yes.
We're drawing in all of these guests and even foreigners. Amen. And so I hope that this has been a blessing to you. Remember, we do this every Monday night at 6 p.m., our Truth and Liberty live cast. Join us again next week.
Join us next time for the Truth and Liberty broadcast. Find tonight's episode and related articles and links at truthandliberty.net.